Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And this episode, we'll be talking about Ben Wheatley's stylish shoot-'em-up Free Fire and Old Guard, the new comic from Greg Rucka and Leandro Fernandez. We'll also be seeing what we thought of the rest of the first season of Legion and finding out what Nick thought of Run Lola Run. But before all of that, Nick, any recent recommendations?
Well, in a recent Comixology sale, I bought most of the issues to date of the Image comic Deadly Class, which is by Rick Remender and Wes Craig, and is a story about a young kid called Marcus who's had a rough life and lived on the street and been abused and generally toughened up in various ways, and then gets recruited into an international school for assassins by the mysterious Master Lin, where he and lots of other kids... And it's him and a bunch of other kids who are mostly like the children of crime families, and basically it's evil Harry Potter. Well, it's somewhere between evil Harry Potter and evil X-Men. The kids' stuff is very Harry Potter, like there's actually, rather than the X-Men where the school bit is kind of played down and they're mostly just superheroes, it is definitely, actually a school with teenagers being teenagers. But Master Lin is definitely played as a sort of evil version of Professor X.
So is there magic and fantastical elements or science fiction elements?
No, they're assassins in the very visceral sense. They stab, shoot, and strangle. And they have, it's quite sort of heightened. Like, they have classes like elementary beheading and stuff. But
elementary beheading, that's brilliant.
I know, it's quite, I don't know, I sort of reluctant to characterise it as dark comedy, because it's quite sort of straight in a lot of ways. Like, it's set in the 80s, and it's very sort of lurid and bright coloured. The violence is quite sudden and graphic. All the characters are quite sort of serious, or at least sort of serious teenage angst type thing. The dark comedy is quite sort of understated, or at least quite wry, in that it's obviously kind of silly, but no one sort of makes smug wisecracks pointing out how silly it is. It's just there being quite silly. And it's just a really good comic. There's a really good cliffhanger most issues. There's that sort of sense that any member of the cast could die, which is always a nice feeling to have. I'm about 14, 15 issues in, I think. I think about 26, 27 have been published. So I am going to run out fairly soon, and that's a shame. It's only taken me about a week to get this far. Throwing in the sort of the puberty, teen angst elements does... I don't know, it raises the stakes a bit, because obviously when you're a teenager, everything seems like life or death, and these are like assassins who are being constantly trained to kill each other, so now it often is.
Yeah, that's a good element of upping the teen drama.
Well, yeah, there's lots of sort of, sometimes they're on a mission and then suddenly the angst will get in the way and someone will get stabbed or shot or just flat out murdered. It's very nicely balanced, and the art by Wes Craig is like lovely. It's very sort of, as I say, it's very sort of stark and brightly coloured. There's lots of sort of very clear graphic images, both graphic in the sense of being nicely designed and graphic in the sense of, holy shit, that guy just cut that guy's head off and there's blood everywhere.
Yeah.
Plus he fits a lot of panels on a page without sacrificing clarity. It's very well designed sort of stark art.
Good stuff.
Yep, Alastair, what have you been reading, doing, watching, writing, thinking?
I've been reading 6 Stories by Matt Wesolowski. Full disclosure, Matt was a friend of mine from a university writers group, and his debut novel's just come out. It's a crime thriller. I'd say it's like a dark crime thriller. It's really good so far. The premise is that there was a teenage boy who disappeared during a sort of wilderness excursion in Northumberland at a place called Scarclaw Fell. He disappeared for a year before eventually his body was found, and there was a sort of a big national story and sort of media circus around this. And then that happened 20 years ago. Currently, a true crime podcast is investigating the events around the boy's disappearance and ultimate death.
We are finally getting crime novels about true crime podcasts. Excellent.
It's very contemporary. Obviously, it's informed by things like Serial and S-Town. Yeah, so what you get is kind of the investigation into what happened, and you get kind of like Serial, but fictional. You get like different people's points of view and different sort of like backgrounds on the events. And, it doesn't like Serial, it doesn't say like, this is concretely the solution to what happened. Like, this is all the evidence we have for the various different theories. It's really good. The characters are really well developed, all the various people in the kind of extended sort of social network around this teenager who died. They're all like really realistically developed. You get a real sense that they're convincing like real people, and you're sort of very taken in by the whole premise. And it's got a real sort of like creepy undertone or sort of dark undertone, I guess, because ultimately it's about a kid that died out in the wilderness in mysterious circumstances. But there's especially the opening, which is sort of written from the point of view of the guy who found the the body of the kid. It's really intense and enthralling, but there's sort of something kind of quite unsettling underneath it all. If you're a fan of true crime podcasts, then I recommend you check out Six Stories.
I'm actually going to consider checking that out. That sounds interesting. So presumably, unlike, say, Serial, there's probably a satisfying end coming. They can't really just trail off with, well, there we go, that happened.
Well, I haven't got to the end.
Even if you had, I probably shouldn't say, Alastair, tell us the ending. But yeah, one has to assume that there'll be something resembling a satisfying ending.
Yeah, I think there'll be a sort of a balance, because I think the author is very much going for the sense of ambiguity you get for something like Serial. Like, there isn't a concrete unmasking moment and like, aha, this is the solution, this is what happened. It's more about different people's perceptions of what happened in different kind of competing narratives. I don't know, maybe we'll get to the end and there will be a very solid solution, but remains to be seen at this point.
Is this a good book to listen to in audiobook? Do they play up the podcast thing? Do they do effects?
Yeah, well, they don't have effects, but they do. It is very well done that, unlike most audiobooks where you have sort of just one narrator who reads like the entire book, maybe does like sort of different voices for different characters, but pretty much one narrator. They've actually got a cast of about 7 or 8 different actors sort of to play the different parts. So you do get different voices and like sort of dialogues back and forth between characters, which does really, again, immerse you in the kind of podcast.
And do they include the bits where people go, shit, I'll say that again, or have they presented you with the edited version of the podcast?
Yeah, it's kind of supposed to be like what you're listening to or reading is kind of like the final version. So the podcast is done in like 6 episodes, which is why it's called Six Stories. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good one. Yeah, I'd highly recommend the book or the audiobook. First, we will be talking about Free Fire, the new film from British indie darling Ben Wheatley. Set in the 1970s and based around a gun deal that goes wrong and ends up with various gangsters, gun runners, IRA members, freelance hitmen and smackheads shooting at each other in a warehouse. We went to see it recently, so Nick, what did you think?
I thought it was pretty good, yeah. It was very solid, very tight. I don't even get to the coveted tight as fuck award, because I didn't quite feel like I was being carried sort of effortlessly along on a sea of beautiful storytelling towards an inevitable conclusion. But it is, this sort of it's all one fight structure is very sort of clever and well executed, and you can see that he's clearly had to build it very delicately, this sort of Jenga tower of he goes here, he goes there, she goes there, something falls to the ceiling which causes that one to go to this location, and then this bursts in from over there, and then in order to stop there being like a lapse in the momentum, this has to happen. And yeah, it mostly works. A lot of thoughts clearly got into keeping it moving. There are a few bits where the momentum maybe sort of wobbles a bit, where it's sort of there's clearly a gap between interesting bits where he just has them sort of popping off shots at each other and exchanging wisecracks. But yeah, they are usually quite good, well-listened wisecracks, and the characters are as you'd expect from a good, solid, like, contained film of this calibre. He does a good job of building the characters convincingly within the film. So yeah, considering that one of our sort of standard complaints for a lot of films these days is that the half-hour action sequence at the end loses momentum by about 10 minutes in. The fact that this mostly keeps up momentum in an action sequence for, I think it's probably about 70 minutes, the action part of this film. Yeah, pretty impressive, all told.
I really liked it as well. Thought, yeah, it's very tense throughout. As you said, like, it's well put together how sort of they choreograph this one extended real-time sort of fight sequence that takes up the majority of the film. Yeah, there's almost something a bit like play-like about it. It all takes place in real time in one location with a kind of a small cast of well-developed characters. Yeah, it's very tense, which I really liked. It brought enough humour to keep it entertaining, as well as like the kind of the wisecracks, as you mentioned. There's a sort of black comedy, sort of slapstick comedy element to it, and there's something kind of weirdly funny in the way it shows people kind of being shot in the arm or the leg and falling over or being hit on the head or occasionally like set on fire.
There are a few moments where it's willing to really go into the sort of the Bugs Bunny side of the violence.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but yeah. There are clearly times where it's just willing to do a big sort of, lol, he's been smacked in the face, or, yeah, lol, the car has just rushed across the screen and smacked into him.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, as well as this sort of dark humour element to it, it is, like, very, very gritty as well. Like, someone, like, accidentally crawls over broken glass. And, there is a real kind of like, oh, that's, it's quite visceral. And it's like, wow, that's quite painful. It's quite, intense and gritty. But then also there's moments when, like, people are getting, like, smacked or shot. And it's sort of played for laughs. So it's, weird how it kind of dances around both being kind of, like, quite grim and gritty and also being quite funny. It kind of balances both well, which is what keeps it entertaining.
Well, yeah, as well as the sort of the silly heightened slapstick violence. I think Ben Wheatley did say somewhere that, as you were saying, he wants to, like, get back to the smallness and the realism of, violence person being hurt. A character can like accidentally stick their hand in some broken glass, or a bit of masonry can fall from the ceiling, and that's almost a bigger danger than actually being shot by another person. And yeah, I think that comes across well. It is a very messy, murky sort of, oh dear, I've just sod in some dog shit type world. It feels very sort of down to earth and real, even though it's a film entirely about violence, and obviously film violence has started to become something that barely resembles real violence. This does mostly feel quite sort of tangible and bloody and sort of, ow, I felt that. I mean, being shot obviously seems less of a magical death hit than it does in other bits of media. You know, a lot of these people get shot several times, and only occasionally does it cause, like, instant or inevitable death.
Yeah, well, they get, like, shot in the leg or the arm or something like, it's like glancing shots, you know, that sort of ricocheted off you. Because I guess it's not like so many other things when films or TV shows where being shot is quite a clean process, basically. Like, you get shot and you fall down and that's it. There's no blood, there's no agony, there's no sort of twisting around. Whereas, like, again, I think this is going for realism where, yeah, you can be shot in the arm. Because it all takes place in real time, there's several people who are, like, sort of slowly bleeding to death throughout the film in need of urgent medical attention. And there's a few characters that get shot in the head or, you know, right in the chest. That's the end of them.
Well, yeah, I was assuming it's more realistic. Obviously, I have no first-hand experience of being shot, but I'm assuming that it's not necessarily realistic, that, oh dear, he's been shot in the shoulder, it's time to die.
Yeah, you know, I like what he's doing, taking cinema back to kind of a more realistic portrayal of violence, or, you know, taking cinema to a more realistic portrayal of violence. I don't know if cinema's ever been realistic in its portrayal of violence, but there are some, like, properly gruesome bits, like especially one character gets set on fire, and that's pretty like kind of, that's the way that you sort of clothes kind of merge with his flesh because they've kind of been burnt and mixed together, and it's like, yeah, it can be pretty viscerally unpleasant when it wants to be.
Yeah, the way that character after that as well, it's just sort of shaking and staring blankly around him. Yeah, that was one of the less funny parts.
Yeah, still alive, but kind of on the verge of death, but like not quite there yet.
But yeah, what you were saying about it being played like, it actually reminded me of Inside Number 9 a bit. If the Inside Number 9 guys were more concerned with shooting and less with horror. The one location, tight cast, good characterisation, very intricate set piece leading up to an ending twist.
Yeah, again, there's something quite, again, play-like about each episode of Inside Number 9. Again, with like this confined location, usually takes place in real time, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I also liked about it is the really, like, strong characterization. Each character has their own personality and is quite clearly defined, and you get to know each one, even though there isn't, like, an enormous amount of dialogue. You know, it's not, like, heavy-handed and kind of, I'm going to sit you down and tell you about this character's life. Everyone has, like, a bit of personality, and that, like, comes across in how they interact with the other characters, be them kind of shooting at them, insulting them, or the brief nice bit at the beginning of the film before it massively kicks off.
Well, I liked a lot of them. Obviously, Cillian Murphy's good in most things. Brie Larson is also pretty reliable. I like seeing Charlito Copley playing Vernon, probably the most sort of over-the-top, silly, look at me, I'm a big gangster, but obviously everyone's sort of laughing at him.
Yeah, he's the funniest character, probably.
The funny, ridiculous one. I saw Charlito Copley in Powers last year, the TV adaptation of the quite good indie comic, which I think got cancelled after 2 years, and he never really got much massively exciting to do in that show. He was playing a very sort of square-jawed, boring character. But, yeah, he's really good here. He's clearly enjoying the silly accents and the silly puns and the poncing around in a ridiculous suit and shouting at people and constantly self-aggrandizing. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I thought the cast was really strong. Brie Larson was very, very good. Again, as sort of the outsider to the group, the one who's sort of bringing people together. So in the shootout, no one's really sure which side she's on, or if she's just on her own side, or she moves between sides, because there's the IRA people on one side, and there's the gun runners on another, and then there's a sort of various middlemen and people setting up the deal who fluctuate between different sides. They're sort of free-floating agents. And yeah, Brie Larson plays one of those. I thought she's very good playing the character. You're not really sure what her angle is. They also had Arnie Hammer playing another character like that. Again, he's quite good sort of sending up his kind of traditional tough man persona.
Yeah, he plays it quite nicely as this guy who sort of clearly sees himself as being above all these sort of silly little people throwing tantrums and shooting each other. But then, of course, inevitably they all come across as quite, you know, at least they're viscerally trying to save each other's lives, whereas he's just sitting there hiding behind the biggest bit of rubble he can find and making shitty remarks about everyone, so he just comes across as a bit of a prick. He's
constantly insulting Michael Smiley's character. They have a kind of falling out quite early on, and when it turns violent, they're quite determined to shoot each other. Yeah, Michael Smiley, again, really good actor who has been in like a lot of good TV shows, like he's in Luther. He's Tyres in Spaced, for those who remember that, probably one of the most memorable Space characters. And yeah, he's been in a lot of films, and he's a good actor. He's somebody who doesn't get enough work, but he's very good in this film.
Yeah, but it is a very sort of British film type film. I mean, I do feel like I've seen this sort of vibe, this sort of matey gangsters knowingly exchanging quips while shooting each other quite a lot in British films. For some reason, they've got this sort of 70s, 80s get up going on?
Yeah, it's a sort of 70s aesthetic in the in the kind of the fashion and like the hair and things like that. Like sort of Arnie Hammer, and he's got a very like 70s beard, and period music like Run Through the Jungle plays at one point, and although Run Through the Jungle might have come out in the 60s. And and there's a sort of the aesthetic, everything down to like the font for like the titles and the sort of the politics, that's based around like an IRA gun buy, and also the way everyone dresses and stuff. It's very like exaggerated for the period to try and really turn up the kind of stylism of it. It's unlikely that people dress so self-consciously of a period at the time. Obviously most people just like throw on jeans and t-shirts and kind of have throughout sort of history, but like everyone's quite precisely turned out in what was the sort of the fashion of the time.
Wait, you say you wouldn't turn up to an arms deal dressed like you're going to a fancy dress party?
Wouldn't necessarily turn up to an arms deal dressed that I've just been shopping at Uniqlo,
or like on your way to a nightclub to do some Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta. Yeah, but again, it's because it's this sort of single heightened scene. You want to sort of get your point across very quickly, and that means making it hit the 70s meter fairly high, so people know, okay, we're in the 70s, without you having to do like 2 scenes worth of exposition. Once people see a couple of jackets and sort of open necklines on men, we can go, okay, we're in the 70s, let's move on.
Yeah, and like the music and things like that. But also it's part of the sort of stylish way the film is put together. Like, it's very slick. I think you're right, you said it stops short of being tight as fuck, but it is it's quite slick and it's quite stylized. I mean, that's kind of a big part of like Ben Wheatley's like approach, in that his films are like, again, quite stylish. Like High Rise, again, had a very certain aesthetic and a very certain look. It was quite 80s in many ways. It was very 80s, to the point that it ends with kind of a recording of a Margaret Thatcher speech. He did A Field in England, which is, again, it's all black and white and murky, and it's like, again, it's very stylish, even though it's not like Wes Anderson, a director who has pretty much one style that comes into every film with sort of subtle variations. All of Ben Wheatley's films are quite stylish, but in like a sort of independent way. And this one's a sort of slick 70s action film approach.
Yeah, it would be pretty obnoxious to say this isn't obviously very stylish and very well made. I think, but I say it isn't tight as fuck or whatever. I mean, I guess it never quite transcends, which is another term we've used in previous reviews, but I know what I mean. It never quite becomes a magic thing where I'm deeply invested and following every twist with my heart in my mouth. I mean, for a previous example of that, we need only go back one fortnight to Get Out. This is not quite the transcendent level of Get Out. It never connects on a massive emotional level. I admire it a lot. I enjoyed it a lot. I didn't mega care when anyone died. I maybe spiked as high as, oh dear, that's a shame. But still, I mean, actually, I think the criticism of it being a bit cold and hard to relate to is what I saw levelled at High Rise as well, actually. I think I've seen people go, yeah, I can see this is well made. I don't care. I don't think this is going to have the same problem to that degree. But yes, this is both well made and very entertaining. He's clearly, comparatively speaking, going for some fairly big sort of marquee entertainment value here. What with all the jokes and all the shooting.
I mean, it is quite cold and distant, because I think that's part of his aesthetic and his approach to filmmaking, in that it's not so grounded in a really accessible protagonist like a lot of films are. I think it's not quite as cold as High Rise.
It's nowhere near as cold as High Rise. The characters have warmth. They have, you're invited to care about them a little bit.
Yeah, and also they're all in a sort of a very direct life and death struggle, so their kind of motivations are quite, straightforward, and, everyone wants to survive.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not being kept remotely in the same way. It's a very obvious, real struggle. You can see them sort of grasping to stay alive, even if it's sometimes done in a slightly one step beyond sort of black comedy way. It's still what's happening.
Yeah, and also, which is good, it makes all the characters relatable, and also there's no one side that you're on. I mean, some people may choose like one side and root for that side, but it's not like, oh, I really want the IRA guys to win, or I really want the gun runners to win.
Yeah, I mean, now you've got me thinking. I did come away thinking he painted the gun runners as largely a group of twats compared to the IRA guys, but I guess it's quite subjective.
I guess maybe like the main two IRA guys were a bit more likeable, the Cillian Murphy and Michael Smiley characters, but their sort of supporting henchmen were pretty odious and pretty dislikable. And if it was any one character I was rooting for, it was probably the Brie Larson character, Justine. I believe was her name.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she was playing all angles, and you kind of wanted it to work out well for her in the end and not to get shot in the head as some people did. We won't spoil, obviously, who ends up the last person standing at the end of the film. I don't know, I kind of knew what direction it was going in from the beginning, but that didn't stop it being like a really entertaining ride. And I was still guessing, when it got down to the final few, who I sort of knew would last to the end, I was uncertain over who would be the actual like last person standing.
Yes, no, as I say, there's no point in spoiling it, but I agree with most of that, yes. Especially when if you could just sort of sit back and watch it on DVD for a laugh. This is a fun film. It's a good evening. Okay, next up, we'll be talking again about Legion, the X-Men adjacent TV show from Fox, which we discussed for the first time back in MFV 28, but unlike some TV shows where we hit the early episodes on here, I think we've both actually kept up with this one, and it's been really good, and I think it's got a fair bit of buzz going around it. I've seen a lot of positive talk on Twitter, so we thought we'd come back now that the season's finished and talk about how we felt about it in retrospect. This is still about David Haller, a young mutant with ill-defined massive amounts of mutant power, who also appears to suffer from, again, a slightly ill-defined but quite serious mental illness, and the sort of back and forth between the two, and, well, there's both a group of mutant freedom fighters and an evil government agency and a third party that seems to be sort of living in David's head that are attempting to use him for their own ends, and meanwhile he himself is also trying to gather some sense of his own identity whilst dealing with all these people, sort of trying to get him to work for them or submit to them. So yes, let's talk about the last few episodes of Legion. Well, most of the season of Legion, I guess. I think since we're covering this for a second time, we're probably going to be reasonably open about spoilers. You know, we won't just state what happens at the end unless we have to, but we may well mention things that happen in like the later few episodes. So if you're mega sensitive about Legion spoilers, I would suggest using our notes to skip on to the old guard. And with that, Alastair, what did you think about the rest of Legion?
It's very good, yeah. I really enjoyed this show. It's probably the best TV show that I've watched so far this year. I suppose the bar wasn't set particularly high by Iron Fist, and it's still early in the year. But it's really good. I did like it a lot. The core of this show is very much a sort of strong cast of characters that, you know, are really empathetic and you engage with. And, you know, I really was like rooting for, especially David, I was rooting for, you know, whenever he was in peril for him to come through, as well as his kind of core supporting characters, his like his love interest and others. So yeah, having these like kind of really good, likable, well-acted main characters did make the show, you know, really enjoyable to watch. Yeah, and it also had like a really interesting and slightly unusual aesthetic again. It's a bit abstract. It was very abstract in some places. And also the whole thing's kind of shot through with this, again, kind of 60s aesthetic. You know, obviously we're talking about the 70s look of Free Fire. There's a kind of, you know, just in sort of the clothes and the hair, the interior design.
Yeah, and I think the impressive part is that a lot of the stuff that we say about its aesthetic, the way the story unfolds quite abstractly, the way it focuses quite heavily on the cool way that a certain scene is shot, and the way a lot of the storytelling is sort of mindscape stuff, telepathy based, walking through fake landscapes, having what basically amount to hallucinations. This is the sort of thing that can go quite wrong, and the fact that most of the season does deal with that sort of storytelling and it's all quite good is... It's always impressive when one of these shows turns up and manages this and doesn't disappear straight up its own bumhole.
Yeah, you are completely right about that. A lot of shows, when they introduce the Mindscape battle, is usually when the show is, again, like he's saying, like disappearing up its own arse. There's a hero's plot line in like the sort of third or fourth series when they were like completely disappearing down the toilet, when like Peter and Sila get locked inside, you know, one of theirs mind, and there's a kind of Inception like fight sequence going on, and it really is like, oh, you just become completely self-indulgent. So to kind of have the premise of your show being like it's all about what's going on in the main character's head is like a really difficult conceit to pull off, and I think they did it really well, mainly by making the show really abstract in places, like, yeah, having kind of like some really weird bits like going into black and white at times, or like silent movie bits, or, you know, when like dialogue comes up in sort of title cards, and sort of musical sequences or bizarre kind of monologues that are sort of dreamlike. It was really quite abstract, but what's good about abstraction is it allows you to convey the emotional sort of essence of something rather than the kind of down-to-earth practicalities of it. It's a good way of showing like how something feels. An emotion is something that's quite difficult to communicate, especially visually. But like abstraction allows you to do that, which is what makes the show so good.
Well, yeah, and a lot of it is just the sort of walk the walk, talk the talk thing. Ultimately, it's quite easy to make a really generic, on-the-nose, we're going into the Mindscape sequence, where there's some really obvious metaphor, or they just, as we've said before, look at each other and do the concentration face. But actually pulling it off by having enough clever, creative ideas for how to portray the Mindscape and how to, you know, make that work within the medium of television by playing it as a silent movie or whatever. And, you know, that's very, it's a risk because it sort of pulls you out of the show. It's very sort of, you are watching a TV show. But if you're buying into the sort of vibe this show has, and I do have a friend who, on I think my and someone else's recommendation, downloaded all the episodes of Legion to his Skybox, watched the first 15 minutes of episode 1, and then decided the whole look really annoyed him and then deleted them all again. You know, there is going to be a degree of Marmitey love it or hate it about this. Some people, even though I think it's quite a good example of smug abstraction, will still think, fuck all this smug abstraction, I'm going to delete it from my Skybox.
Yeah, it's not to everyone's taste. It is really to my taste, I would say, is that like, I really like kind of that this show is like doing something quite different in that it's going to be like quite abstract and it's got like a powerful aesthetic, and like it's not just we do it a bit, it's in every episode, and sometimes it's like all the time in some episodes. So especially like I think like the 7th episode, which is all very much takes place inside David's head, is like really, really like odd and weird, and has people walking through walls in diving bells, and like again going into black and white and stuff, strange colours, and the use of Pink Floyd's "Breathe," which is a brilliant song. That's an excellent use of that track. But I really liked, I just really dug the look of it, the strangeness of it. I was really like, I like that this is doing something different, and I like the 60s thing they had running through it, the interior design and like the clothes and stuff, especially the Amy character, Dan's sister. I just remember like her hairstyle and fashion sense is like really archetypal 60s, and obviously it's sort of a bit science fiction. There's like sci-fi gadgets and gizmos in it, but also the style is so consciously of the past that it kind of makes the whole thing like timeless, which I really like, is that you're not really sure when it's set or if it's set at any particular point. It kind of exists in its own sort of slightly strange world, partly because like the 60s aesthetic was like so much geared towards like anticipation of the future, which is what makes it, I think, work really well for science fiction, whereas now we've put more value in like being retro, which I guess this show is, I suppose, if they're invoking a past aesthetic. But it does give it this sort of timeless quality that I really liked.
Yeah, and I think the fact it's obviously been constructed like that from the start, like they haven't lurched into any of this sort of the oddness or this specific aesthetic or this specific amount of abstraction a few years in when they start running out of ideas. It's obviously been, you know, planned and built like that, so the execution actually worked. And yeah, it reminded me of a lot of sort of formal experimentation I've seen in comic books. There have been things in comics where characters have like climbed between panels, like, you know, visibly climbed over the panel border or punched through it, or there were like things we were talking about in Curse Words a few weeks back where they did like cool tricks with lettering, or I don't know, there have been some Grant Morrison comics where he's talked directly to the reader, and this is sort of a comics adaptation. It's one of these comics adaptations which has combined various elements from Legion stories across the years and sort of distilled it into something specific, and something that is sort of its own thing and slightly different, if anything, from any of the Legion stories it's actually originally started from. I don't know if I've seen quite as much of that sort of experimental weirdness and genuinely punching at the sides of its form in TV, so I felt like it was, if anything, adapting that sense from comics, but rather than, you know, putting comic panels on screen, which would have been shit, it sort of adapted punching at the edges of the comics format into punching at the edges of the TV format, which is the right kind of adaptation, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that, again, it's inherited that sense of being experimental and trying new things, and like you couldn't recreate like sort of an experimental comic style in TV without it. It wouldn't necessarily work so well, but like they are again trying out new things and pushing at the edge of the TV formats, trying to do something a bit different and stuff, and like by being so consciously stylistic and being so abstract. Yeah, and I like the fact they're experimenting, they're trying something new, because there's a lot of superhero TV shows out there, and like you don't want to just create another generic one it's another sort of guy with powers. I'm not saying those other shows are inherently bad. If you want a story that's told in that way, and you want a story that's told in a straightforward way with kind of like goodies and baddies and stuff, and there's like kind of easy emotional investment on one side and you can kind of really get caught up in, that's good. But we kind of have that, so I wouldn't necessarily see the value in kind of creating more like that, whereas like, oh, let's do something different, make it strange and make it more kind of about detailed like personal conflict going on in this guy's head. I mean, it's even things like the villain that's kind of one of the main villains introduced in the first episode and sort of disappears. He kind of gets set on fire, and then in the last episode they kind of show his rehabilitation process and like him being treated and in a burn ward, and this villain's husband being like really upset about how he's hurt and stuff, and it makes you think that like in a lot of shows, again, people get killed or set on fire, and it's kind of like, oh, that guy's bad, so he deserved it. And now you're kind of like, oh, that guy was a bad guy, but like, you know, he's really been made to suffer. It's really awful. Like, it's doing something a bit different in that way.
Yeah, and you know, although it is doing a lot of abstraction and a lot of sort of creative work with the superhero tropes, fight genre, it does also still have that in it. I mean, we do here have a team of mutant superheroes, each of whom has a different sort of cool power, fighting against a villain that's actually called the Shadow King. So, you know, the superhero tropes are definitely still in there. I mean, in terms of the individual characters, they did a good job of sort of building the team in an organic way and making you care a little about everybody. Like, there wasn't really a scene where I was told to care about the individual characters in David's sort of supporting cast, like Melanie and Carey and the other Carey and Autonomy, and Sid, obviously, the love interest character, who powers-wise is kind of rogue, but not quite rogue. But yeah, you do sort of slowly care about them, just sort of gently mesh with them as you spend more time with them over the course of, I guess, the first half of the series. I was particularly impressed by the Carey character, actually, the two Careys. I thought they did a really good job of making that, again, a superpower I have sort of seen in comics. Certainly the sort of splitting into different bodies thing and really sort of digging into it and both the ramifications of it and the emotions of it, and the idea that the woman Carey, the female one who lives within the body of the male one, is younger than him because she only ages when she's outside the male body, and they have this weird sort of dependent yet slightly tense relationship, and one of them loves fighting, the other one loves science, and there's some really, really emotional bits where they get hurt and stuff, and yeah, it's just lovely. That character especially, but all of it's very strong.
Yeah, they were good characters and stuff. I liked how the mutant cast and the different people, all their powers were, again, a bit unusual. They weren't like kind of your standard sort of superhero tropes like, or, you know, one doesn't shoot fire or run super fast or have super strength. They're all like, yeah, one's got another person living inside them, one sort of has this body swapping ability, another one can enter dreams. They're kind of just a bit different. Like, it's kind of like, we'll have a cast of superheroes, but let's take a moment to think about unusual abilities that could also create some interesting storylines, rather than just like going for the obvious ones.
Yeah, the closest I can get to a characterisation complaint is that the slight sort of insta-love at the beginning with Sid and David, who do just sort of meet and immediately fall in love, and it's played kind of charmingly, and it is one of the only things which really sort of goes straight like that in the whole series, so I'm sort of prepared to have that be the one I give them.
Yeah, exactly. I did like the way they approached the really like difficult task of making a show that's entirely set within one character's head. Again, they're using this kind of like abstract style. It means they can sort of show visually, you know, the personal conflict that's going on within David's head. And because so much of the other conflicts happen in there, the characters spend so much time travelling into David's mind. That's where things like, you know, their relationship drama takes place, or that's where the kind of big external evil force is encountered. Because it all happens in his head, they had to, you know, adapting this kind of abstract style conveys visually the drama that they're trying to express, which would be difficult to do otherwise.
Well, yeah, and aside from the drama, I think it's also an interesting attempt to talk about mental health in a vaguely...
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't understandable is the way, because you sometimes struggle to convey exactly what's literally happening on screen, but on the other hand, I think for a lot of people that is a reality of it. It is hard to describe what's literally happening. If some things are hard to think about, some things are hard to look at, and it just becomes this sort of intense, maddening blur of difficult things and anger. And I think this show, through its sort of mental landscapes and use of metaphor and abstraction, does actually convey that quite nicely. The way that things don't actually, you know, you're not cured, you're just better for a bit, and it's always sort of lurking in there, like the Shadow King in its little box or whatever, or David's constant sort of shouting angry voices. I mean, when David was originally created, I think the basic premise is his superhero name is Legion because he has a split personality and therefore he has a lot of voices in his head, because this was a few decades ago, and, you know, that's the level of mental health understanding one gets in sort of X-Men comics. But, you know, they've clearly gone back to that and tried to make it a bit more of a nuanced portrayal of how that sort of thing feels, and I think, as well as an opportunity for smug people like ourselves to watch it and go, this is certainly a well-made abstract television show, I think it does actually convey that feeling in a visceral way, and I think that's why it's good and works.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is good that they're sort of trying to grapple with issues to do with mental health and trying to find a way to present what it's like to suffer from serious mental health problems and the fear and confusion that it can create, and show, again, like trying to dramatize, you know, again, what's going on in someone's head in a sort of accessible way that kind of conveys what that character is feeling. You don't show literally what's happening, you show the sense of what's going on, or kind of the feeling, rather than, you know, something more concrete. Yeah, which is a very good way to have a more nuanced portrayal of mental health problems on TV.
Yeah, and possibly one of the last big things I want to talk about for this show, and just for the record, I probably can't do this with at least moderate spoilers for some of the big twists. So, last spoiler warning, I guess, if you want to go, then go, is the ready? Okay. Is the Aubrey Plaza character, Lenny, who later is revealed to be basically the main incarnation of the villain, the aforementioned Shadow King, who starts off as this friendly presence and then slowly morphs into this absolutely terrifying one. Aubrey Plaza, of course, she's in most of Parks and Recreation. In fact, fuck it, she's one of the main characters. She's in basically all of it. And she's great in that. And she plays a very sort of self-aware, specific persona in that. A lot of her other stuff has kind of seemed to be just an evolution of that persona. But here she does really act the shit out of this very sort of exaggerated, massive presence. Particularly in the latter half of the season when, again, definitely spoilers now, she is basically revealed to be the villain. Yeah, she sort of morphs into this sort of terrifying, deaf, goth, supervillain pixie thing. Yeah, it's pretty excellent. She has a dance sequence in episode 6 that steals the entire episode, and it's just this incredibly scary, malevolent force.
She's a very good actress, yeah, and it's a really good part. Like, she kind of completely takes over, like, every scene she's in.
By the end, or by her last few big climactic action sequences in the last couple of episodes, she's morphed into this full Tim Burton villain figure with this sort of ridiculous hair, like heavily styled, messy, in air quotes, hair, and sort of leather and stuff, and then she sort of slides back to being a pretty girl in a summer dress in the last couple of scenes, and yeah, the fact that she can go from one to the other, and it's all consistent, and it's all in its own way quite scary. It's a great performance, but it's a testament to the fact that the rest of it is very memorable, and that it doesn't completely overshadow all the interesting stuff with the supporting cast and David's mental journey. It's just another good thing in a good show.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords in the small part of Oliver, and it's good to see that based on the ending he'll probably be in next season as well.
Yeah, he was also very good. Yeah, and a really, again, charismatic sort of scene-stealing character introduced later on. Yeah, and again, he's a really good actor who it's good to see doing more great work.
Yeah, and I think this could be a good punt for one of the best superhero things of the year, to be honest, to the extent that it is a superhero thing. It's certainly one of the best attempts I've seen to make sort of superhero source material into modern premium TV. I think the Netflix shows are having a good shot at it, but in a slightly shonkier way. This is certainly the best, smoothest, most successful outcome I've seen. And next, it's The Old Guard, a new comic from Image Comics, written by Greg Rucka and drawn by Leandro Fernandez. It focuses on a group of mercenaries in contemporary times, led by Andy and also featuring, I believe, Nikki, Joe and Booker are the other three, who, it turns out, are also immortals who have been around for varying degrees of years. I think Andy, the leader, is the oldest at around 2,000 years, so she's been around since, proper ancient times. But anyway, yeah, they're long-standing warriors who now take mercenary jobs in the current political climate, and whenever they die, their injuries heal up and they just get straight back up again. And the implications of how they deal with that are delved into pretty quickly in the first couple of issues. So yep, this is a new series from Greg Rucka, who's also known for doing Wonder Woman for DC and the sci-fi action series Lazarus for Image. He's a pretty big name in comics, so we thought it would be interesting to tackle his new series. Alastair, what did you think?
Good but flawed is the Cliff Notes version. I liked it, yeah. There was a lot of interesting things going on. It was doing some things that were sort of quite different. Yeah, the characters are interesting. Certainly these characters have sort of been around for like very, very long periods of time, have become, I guess, quite cynical and quite desensitized by, I guess, the sheer quantity of violence they've witnessed through human history. Yeah, the premise is, again, quite interesting, how they're kind of these sort of badass assassins. Yeah, and they only really can relate to each other because they're the only people who've experienced what they've experienced. They're very distant from other people. So yeah, again, interesting characters, an interesting premise. And I don't know, there was something in the way I think they didn't quite sort of engage me enough with or get across the psychology of the characters. What it's like being that old and kind of how they seemed a bit too normal. Being that old would just sort of warp your personality so much. I mean, I felt that they could have done more with that. Maybe they will in future issues. It's difficult to judge from just 2 issues, but I felt they could have done that better.
Yeah, I think it did feel very much like, I don't know, I mean, this is a curse of modern comics, I guess, but a lot of them are primarily designed to be read in the later collected editions.
Yeah.
Which is one reason why I don't buy that many individual comics and read them monthly anymore, because, to be honest, I do come away feeling like I've read, 1/6 of a story. And in this case, yeah, I do feel like I've read, I think it's 2/5 or 2/6, depending on how long the first storyline is of a story here. He's introduced the characters, he's introduced the premise, which is very interesting, but yeah, he hasn't really dug into the psychology of them that much. I do agree that it did feel odd that these characters who are meant to be quite... I mean, maybe his point is that they've acclimatised very well and that's part of the ongoing story, it's hard to tell, but they were talking in very sort of standard modern tough guy voices. I mean, there's a bit in the first issue where the lead character Andy makes a "not before I've had my morning coffee" remark to someone else who's being snarky. We are getting a bit into generic tough guy language here. a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the actual premise is quite interesting. The actual story unfolds at quite a good pace. It's very clear that he has plans, and I'm glad we covered the first 2 issues, but I do think a lot more about a direction starts to emerge in book 2, issue 2, whatever. By book 2, I'd hope they'll be well on their way. But yeah, by issue 2, I think there's more of a sense of where it's going, and there's some reveals in the opening sequence of issue 2 about the relationship between 2 of the characters. I think it's Joe and Nikki, about how they met and how their relationship has gone from one place to another, which I think is quite cool and interesting, and is possibly the sort of thing that should have been in issue 1, I don't know, because I did come away from issue 1 thinking I barely have any sense of any characters except Andy, and not that much has actually happened.
Yeah, I agree with that I didn't get a particularly strong sense of the characters or the plot so much from the first issue. I guess because they had to introduce quite a lot, and it's difficult to introduce like premise and characters, and plot all in the first issue. That's why I'm glad I read the second one, when you get to know the characters better and you get a sense of where the plot's going. There are a few, like you say, like sort of generic tough guy bits. I felt there were a few slightly, especially in the first one, there was a few kind of cynical, hard-boiled soldier cliche characters. Over time, I guess the characters will grow and open up more. But at first, it was kind of like, we are starting out on quite a generic footing here, which if you want something that's going to really grab you, is kind of like, I've got something original and different to say in like the first issue. This didn't really do that, but that doesn't mean it kind of won't grow into something that's quite unique.
Well, yeah, but it feels odd that he introduced the obvious sort of point of view newcomer character. I think it's Niall Freeman, who is, I don't know, I guess it's probably not too much of a spoiler to say that at some point in the first 2 issues, the story point comes up of the main characters discovering that a new immortal has emerged.
Yeah.
I won't overtalk how or what happens with it, but that's one of the main plot points that comes up. And yeah, I feel like it always feels weird that he had a clear chance to start with her and use her as sort of a gentle way into the weirdness of these characters, but then sort of actively didn't do that. I guess there's an extent to which you avoid the cliche obvious setup, but I don't know. There's a reason people use it all the time,
Yeah, but I guess there is a certain amount of shortcutting you have to do in your first thing. When you've got a lot introduced, you need to get across this is what the character's like. And archetypes work really well for that, which is what you get in the first issues. You get kind of like, I would say, maybe like cliche is being a bit harsh. What I said before is like, what you get is like you get archetypal soldiers from the beginning. And it was like, okay, archetypes are good for quickly introducing your characters. They're kind of like a framework you need to hang something on. And in the second issue, you get more of a sense of what they're trying to hang on it, but like not a lot. But there was enough for me to be intrigued. Like, I do really want to find out more about the backstories of these characters. Like, I really liked when they were filling in like the various wars that they've been involved with over the years. And it's kind of done in a sort of, they don't have a kind of, oh, here's like a big ancient set piece of kind of people fighting in front of like the Colossus at Rhodes or something other famous. It's kind of like, it's quite personal. Like, you see them like fighting throughout history, but it's usually just up close, like one person, usually against a plain background, stabbing someone. And it's quite dark and drawn with kind of a lot of shadow and stuff. They resist the urge to go for, oh, here's the greatest hits of ancient history you may remember from school, and like we're going to drop our characters in it. It's more like, here's just some people fighting at points throughout history, which I thought was, again, quite a sort of slightly different way to do it. It's something like, to kind of focus it more on the characters and the sense of like the same violence has just been happening over and over throughout history was a good take on it.
I guess there's an obvious link there to go into talking about the art. I thought the art was lovely. For the most part, I think, in fact, pretty much entirely, to be honest. I think it stands out kind of by not being the sort of chunky, heavily detailed art you get in a lot of comics about the military, where people seem to really relish the chance to draw every, like, pouch and gun on their little uniforms, because it's quite curvy and shadowy and European, which I think works quite well when we go into the historical battle sequences as well. But it's very expressive. Like, there's a sense that it is more about the looks on the characters' faces than how many grenades you can draw in that panel.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The art is lovely. It's really, again, the sort of the art I like from comics. Again, that, like you say, it's a bit expressive. It does a lot with some sort of more simple forms in that, like the characters are quite plainly drawn. There's not a lot of detail, as you said, but like they've got real like personality and a real energy about them, so, especially like in the combat scenes and stuff. So I thought they've really done a good job of resisting the urge to go for like a more obvious military aesthetic for this and go for something that's like a bit more subdued, which works really well. My favourite thing about it was just looking at it, because it's just a pleasure to look at.
Yeah, especially the long flashback sequences you were talking about, where you get to think the artist really is relishes drawing like a nice big curved axe swinging into someone. These sort of old school armour and stuff, and the people leaping around and stabbing and stuff. Those bits were particularly lush to look at.
Yeah, and it kind of reminded me of Cry Havoc a bit. which we covered before, and
the obvious sort of military fantasy.
Well, yeah, there's the obvious thing that's like, the military fantasy thing, but I felt like there was something similar in the artwork, the way it was drawn. I mean, I think that the Old Guard is a bit more, as you say, expressionist in its like approach than Cry Havoc, but there's something in the kind of, maybe it's like the use of colours and quite dark palette.
Cry Havoc had the
different colour schemes.
Cry Havoc had the 3 different colour schemes demarcating the different sections, didn't it? It had, what was it, basically the blue section, the sort of yellowy section, and the red section. Yeah. And therefore, the sort of obvious domination of one colour made it look quite uniform. And this, I think, just has quite a lot of flat, clear colours, which is good as well. I mean, Cry Havoc's art was a bit more what I'd think of as slightly standard military art in a lot of ways, in that it was quite sort of detailed pictures of hardware. But I think because the story in Cry Havoc was a lot more about, here's a relatable everyday person going into this sort of military fantasy backdrop, and she hasn't got this sort of background in fantasy story or whatever, it works to have her go, holy shit, that's a real helicopter, and the helicopter actually looks quite detailed and realistic.
Yeah, whereas, they've gone for something slightly different in the Old Guard. Yeah, and they did some dream sequences again that were quite nicely done, again, like very white, and again with a kind of just sort of outline of the character. And the character could be recognisable, but like doing a lot with not much, which I really liked.
But yeah, as strong explosive openings go, I think when we covered the first 2 issues of Curse Words, that did do more to give you, here's a strong opening hook. You know the characters, they're distinct, and it gave us bigger chunks of story. This is definitely paced for the collected edition a bit more, I think, and is perhaps building a bit slower.
Yeah.
Like, I imagine I will go back to this, because I am quite interested by it, but I'll probably just wait a few months and wait till the rest of the first storyline has come out, and B, I can get it all cheap in a Comixology sale, and then I'll just go back and read the whole thing. I think that sounds like what I'll do.
I guess Curse Words primarily had like one core character they needed to introduce and develop, and it was all done from their point of view. They didn't have different locations or different characters, which does make it easier to get more plot and character if there's less to set up in the first couple of issues.
Curse Words did try quite hard to get, the entire like origin sequence into the first issue, though. It was very sort of
condensed.
It did snap through the story a lot quicker, whereas this is perhaps a bit closer to something you'd see in sort of cinema. I think it's sort of walking you through the story in a very sort of conversation by conversation way, which is fine, but that sort of storytelling does lead to slightly more of the feeling of, oh, I see I've read 1/5 of a story in this comic.
Yeah, I would say it's an intriguing opening. It got my attention, and I would be interested to read more. I would say basically I'm interested, but the flaws sort of stop me from being excited. But they're not insurmountable flaws, and lots of great shows, and I'm sure comics as well, have a sort of slightly bumpy start and go on to be really, really good. So if you're intrigued, and then consider reading it.
Yeah, if you only read one Greg Rucka Image comic, I'd probably say stick with Lazarus. But yeah, if you want a second one, this is good. This has a lot of promise.
In the last episode, I recommend that Nick watch Run Lola Run, starring Franca Potenti. Lola has to find 100,000 marks to save her boyfriend Manny, who owes the money to a drug dealer. She has to run around Berlin and find the money before Manny holds up a supermarket. What we see is the same 20-minute run 3 different times with 3 different outcomes. This is a film that I saw when I was a teenager, and was one of the first kind of unusual arty European films that I saw that really blew my mind as kind of like, wow, that's a really awesome film, doing something really interesting. So Nick's had a chance to watch it. What did you think?
Yeah, it's really good, obviously. It's one of those classics you hear about. I mean, full disclosure, I have a vague, annoying feeling I may have seen this at university, but thanks to my slightly dodgy memory of things I've seen, to be honest, I didn't really remember much apart from the vague structure and the fact that I'd seen it. So,
fair enough.
No, this is great. It's very sort of pop cinema. Part of me would struggle to say it's actually about anything or making any like profound statements about the nature of the universe, but it's like less than 80 minutes long, so it doesn't really need to be. It works quite nicely alongside Free Fire, actually. Was that intentional, Alastair?
Yeah, I don't think... No, wait. Yes, I'm agreeing with you that it works well alongside Free Fire. No, it was not intentional. We've got 2 films that pretty much take place in real time that are fast-paced action thrillers.
But it's partly the real-time thing, although I'll get back to that. But yeah, part of me is unconvinced of the reality of the real-time. I'll get back to it. But yeah, the incredibly structured, carefully built aspects of these films felt quite similar. The sort of here is a self-contained thing with a few characters. Because it's the same few minutes again and again, so how Lola's 20 minutes play out depend entirely on like small things, like whether she gets to her first conversation with her dad slightly earlier or later than she would have done before, based on slight delays in the street, and whether certain things bump into certain other things which cause them to go past other things. So there's a lot of intricity, there's a lot of careful structural building here, which again is similar to Free Fire. I'd say this did slightly more for me than Free Fire, just because I enjoyed the artful moments And, in another, big comparison, sort of the Legion-esque stuff, the animation, the flash forwards, the sillier sides, like people carrying glass across the road so that something can crash into it. It's like Chekov's sheet of glass.
Yeah.
There's a sheet of glass, someone's going to go smashing through it. And sure enough.
Yeah, especially if you're not aware, the first time I saw this, I wasn't aware that it was going to play the same events over and over. And when the sheet of glass walks across the road and it doesn't get smashed, I was a bit like, that's a wasted opportunity. And obviously then in the second run, it does get smashed. And yeah, I do really like how it really shows how the little things, how things change based on slight coincidences, and kind of asking that question of could your life have gone in a different direction if it wasn't for one small thing? There's a car accident in the first 2 runs that Lola sort of causes because of the timing between running across the front of a car, and in the third one she prevents the accident by the way that she runs. It kind of shows the different way things could go, because one of the other things in the film is that there's 3 people or so that she bumps into each time during her runs, and you kind of get a bit of moment when you see how that character's life pans out, and it kind of goes in different directions. There's one guy who's a sort of a petty thief. In one version, he injures himself falling off a bike, is in hospital, meets a nurse and gets married. In another, he just becomes a sort of drug addict, homeless person and dies doing heroin in a public toilet.
Yeah,
it shows basically the small things that are outside your control can dictate that your life shoots off in radically different directions.
Yeah, and let's not pretend that's a meaningful and deep philosophy of life. In terms of life philosophy, this film is right up there with Sliding Doors starring Gwyneth Paltrow, but a lot of it is in the style. It plays with time and plays with how it presents all these different possibilities in a way that's incredibly entertaining and poppy and likeable and quick and funny and wry and occasionally emotional. And it just shoves a lot of stuff in there and it just works. The reason it maybe works slightly better than Free Fire, and we'll stop comparing it to Free Fire soon, is that I think when it comes up against a sort of a bump in its structure, it just sort of ignores it or just shoves over it. Whereas I think Free Fire does go, okay, well now I have to show them popping off at each other for a few minutes to get to that next bit. Whereas Run Lola Run, I think, would just probably cut away to something or just snap its fingers and pass over.
Yeah, you're right. The appeal of this film is the stylish way that it's sort of shot and put together. I really like just how action-packed it is, how tense it is, how fast-paced it is. It really is like a roller coaster that sweeps you along with it. It's a real great film just to get swept up in, and it's really fun, energetic movie. And also, Lola is a great main character. She's really likable. She's really capable, especially in the versions of the runs when she is able to rustle up 100,000 marks in less than 20 minutes, which is no mean feat. Yeah. And she's got this sort of distinctive style to her. She's quite famous for her sort of bright red hair and DMs running around Berlin. And yeah, she's a really great main character, played really well by Franca Potenti.
If nothing else, she definitely does a very good run. I'm sure the director is helping her along with the way he's shooting it, but yeah, you can believe she's covering space at an impressive rate, which does very much help with the energy of it. Yeah, the idea of the universe converging, which lets them get away with these ludicrous coincidences and luck, which in other films would feel like a cheat, but in this film does make it feel like it's part of this sort of theme or plot. It just snaps along. There's a slightly portentous intro bit at the very beginning where I think it's a policeman talks straight to camera about destiny or something. Yeah,
it is slightly surreal at times.
It's a bit wanky, but when you first watch it, when I was starting the film, I was a bit sort of, okay, am I going to end up saying this is a bit wanky on the podcast? But, retrospectively, fuck it. I think it sets up a lot of the stuff that plays into the film later. It just drops in random things, like Lola has a magic scream akin to the Black Canary from DC Comics, wherein she screams and things break and glasses shatter or whatever. It just makes it feel like it's part of this big reality bubble that just works for whatever reason.
Yeah, for a film that can be really, really realistic and is sort of grounded in a race against time and crime and stuff, it does have these slightly surreal, almost fantastical bits when Lola screams and glass shatters. I've forgotten how bizarre the opening is before it gets to the first run, when it has the weird fast motion bit when it's moving through a crowd, and then the animated bit of her running down a tunnel punching the credits. Yeah. I mean, that sort of stuff's in the grand tradition of slightly surreal European cinema. It wouldn't be an un-Hollywood European film if they didn't have something some sort of philosophical surreal bit or some bizarre kind of medium bending bits, which is, I don't know, maybe European cinema since then has not had the need to be quite so consciously arty. I don't know, it sort of adds to the film's overall charm that it is sort of slightly bizarre and slightly different, that it goes off in these kind of weird directions as well as just being a straightforward crime film or a straightforward thriller.
Yeah, no, I think I've probably more or less implied several times now, the joy of this film isn't in describing what happens in it, because that'd be kind of blah. A lot of it's in the execution. It's just a very entertainingly made, sort of fun bit of cinema. If I had to get my nitpicking hat on, as I sort of implied earlier, I don't think any of these 20-minute sections, air quotes, could actually fit into 20 minutes, but who cares?
Yeah.
Is my summation response to that criticism. My own criticism. Who cares, Nick? Who'd have
Yeah. It's got some brilliant scenes, this film. This is, I guess, a bit spoilery, but in the second run, when she gets the money by, like, robbing a bank, I thought that was brilliant how she holds up the bank, and then, like, she runs outside with the money, and then the bank's, like, surrounded by cops, and you think she's going to get shot, but then the cops bundle her out of the way because they think she's a hostage running out from the bank, not the actual robber. She has this kind of brilliant moment of, oh, wow, that worked out well. And then kind of just runs off with the money. Yeah, there's also the scene in the third run when she goes to a casino and is able, again, in less than 5 minutes, to rustle up 100,000 marks by playing roulette. And it's just a brilliantly tense scene. This is a bit at the end when, like, the casino's just in stunned silence, watching the cashier count out her money from the huge amount of chips she's just sort of run in and legitimately won incredibly quickly. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, as I say, there are things in this film that would feel like cheats, but they just don't, because you just feel so well inclined towards it. It's, as I say, it's 80 minutes long. In fact, it's slightly less than 80 minutes long. It's brief. It never outstays its welcome, which, especially in modern cinema, is good. Mm-hmm. Free Fire, to give it its credit, yes, another reference to Free Fire, is also a pleasant, just over 90 minutes as well. So yeah, that's what you've got to be aware of for making a film like this, which is just a simple premise, constructed and executed. Just get in, do it, get out. So yes, very good.
I'm really glad that you liked Run Lola Run. I certainly enjoyed watching it again. So, what will you be recommending me for the next episode?
Well, I think it's time to get back to comics, obviously, because in case listeners hadn't spotted it, I have a clever pattern where I recommend Alastair one comic and one something else, and then back to comics. So yeah, having done Crazy Ex-Girlfriend last time, it's comics time, and we're going to do what may be one of the big base recommendations for the entire podcast, because as people may or may not know, I don't know how much I've banged on about it on the show, I do love Spider-Man. He was very much the original superhero for me, and one of my favourite sort of Spider-Man comics ever was the Ultimate Spider-Man series from the early 2000s. So yeah, in that spirit, we're going to do the first volume of Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley. This was a project to try and bring Marvel Comics back to basics, wherein they would launch new versions of the characters set in a vaguely defined alternate reality where their origins were starting in contemporary times rather than the 60s. And obviously this was like 2000, it's now 2017, so the settings of Ultimate Comics now look a bit dated. So yeah, Ultimate Spider-Man by Bendis and Bagley, the first one or two storylines of Ultimate Spider-Man.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's be interesting to read some Spider-Man, as I know you've talked about it a lot, but I've never actually read any of the comics.
Yeah, well, yes, this is... I don't know, is it the best Spider-Man comic? Is it just my favourite, or is it just because it started around the time I was getting into comics seriously that I like it? Who knows, but we can get into that next episode.
That's all we have time for this episode. If you've enjoyed our banter, then please subscribe on iTunes so that you never miss an episode. While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps spread the word of moderate fantasy violence. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can hear back episodes, bonus audio clips, and read short written pieces.
Okay, and you can also follow us on social media. We are MFV Podcast on Twitter, where we post the latest podcast-related news and occasionally comment on recent pop culture developments. And we're also on Facebook, where I think we can be found by just typing our name into the search bar and then our purple logo should appear. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on Twitter as @NickMB, or I have a blog at nickbryan.com where I drop news of my self-published crime books.
I've been Alastair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlastairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. That's all for this episode. Next time we'll be discussing the new series of Doctor Who, the 8th Fast and the Furious film, the 3rd series of Better Call Saul, and finding out what I thought of Nick's recommendation of Ultimate Spider-Man. Tune in then to find out what we thought. Until then, have a great time. Goodbye.
Bye. But they are usually quite good, well-written wisecracks. Well-written wisecracks. Quacks, ducks, what?
That's a Daffy Duck moment.